18. Expose and attack your opponent's soft flank. The turning strategy. When you attack people directly, you stiffen their resistance and make your task that much harder. There is a better way. Distract your opponent's attention to the front, then attack them from the side, where they least expect it. By hitting them where they are soft, tender, and unprotected, you create a shock, a moment of weakness for you to exploit. Bait people into going out on a limb, exposing their weakness, then rake them with fire from the side. The only way to get stubborn opponents to move is to approach them indirectly. Turning the flank. In 1793, Louis XIV and his wife Marie Antoinette, the King and Queen of France, were beheaded by order of the new government put in place after the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was the daughter of Maria Theresa, the Empress of Austria, and as a result of her death, the Austrians became determined enemies of France. Early in 1796, they prepared to invade the country from northern Italy, which at the time was an Austrian possession. In April of that year, the 26-year-old Napoleon Bonaparte was given command of the French army in Italy and charged with a simple mission: to prevent these Austrian armies from entering France. Under Napoleon, for the first time since the Revolution, not only were the French able to hold a defensive position, but they successfully went on the offensive, pushing the Austrians steadily east. Shocking as it was to lose to the Revolutionary Army, it was downright humiliating to be defeated by an unknown general on his first campaign. For 6 months the Austrians sent armies to defeat Napoleon, but he forced each one to retreat into the fortress of Mantua, until finally this stronghold was crammed with Austrian soldiers. Leaving a force at Mantua to pin down the Austrians, Napoleon established his base to the north, in the pivotal city of Verona. If the Austrians were to win the war, they would somehow have to push him out of Verona and free up the starving soldiers trapped in Mantua. And they were running out of time. In October 1796, Baron Joseph del Vinci was given command of some 50,000 Austrian soldiers and the urgent mission of expelling the French from Verona. An experienced commander and clever strategist, del Vinci studied Napoleon's Italian campaign carefully and came to respect his enemy. To defeat this brilliant young general, the Austrians would have to be more flexible, and del Vinci thought he had the solution. He would divide his army into 2 columns, one under himself, the other under the Russian general Paul Davidovich. The columns would separately march south, converging at Verona. At the same time, del Vinci would launch a campaign of deception to make Napoleon think that Davidovich's army was small. It was, in fact, 18,000 men strong. If Napoleon underestimated Davidovich, the Russian general would face less opposition and his way to Verona would be smooth. Del Vinci's plan was to trap Napoleon between the jaws of these 2 armies. The Austrians entered northern Italy in early November. To del Vinci's delight, Napoleon seemed to have fallen for their trick. He sent a relatively light force against Davidovich, who promptly gave the French in Italy their first real defeat and began his advance toward Verona. Meanwhile, del Vinci himself advanced all the way to a point not far from Verona and was poised to fall on the city from the east. As he pored over his maps, del Vinci took pleasure in his plan. If Napoleon sent more men to stop Davidovich, he would weaken Verona against del Vinci. If he tried to block del Vinci's entrance from the east, he would weaken Verona against Davidovich. If he sought reinforcements from his troops at Mantua, he would free up the 20,000 Austrian soldiers trapped there, and they would gobble him up from the south. Del Vinci also knew that Napoleon's men were exhausted and hungry. Not even a young genius like Napoleon could escape this trap. A few days later, del Vinci advanced to the village of Caldiero, at Verona's doorstep. There he inflicted another defeat on the French troops sent to stop him. After a string of victories, Napoleon had now lost 2 battles in a row. The pendulum had swung against him. As del Vinci prepared for his final pounce on Verona, He received confusing news. Against all prediction, Napoleon had in fact divided his army in Verona, but instead of sending parts of it against either Dal Vinci or Davidovich, he had marched a sizable force somewhere to the southeast. The next day, this army appeared outside the town of Arcola. If the French crossed the river to Arcola and advanced a few miles north, they would directly cross Dal Vinci's line of communications and of retreat, and they would be able to seize his supply depots at Villanova. Having this large French army to his rear was more than alarming. Dal Vinci was forced to forget about Verona for the moment and hastily marched east. He had retreated in the nick of time and was able to halt the French before they could cross the river and attack Villanova. For several days the two armies settled into a fiercely contested battle for the bridge at Arcola. Napoleon himself led several charges and was nearly killed. A portion of the troops blocking Mantua were dispatched north to reinforce the French at Arcola, but Dal Vinci's army hunkered down and the battle turned into a stalemate. On the third day of fighting, Dal Vinci's soldiers, their lines thinned by relentless French attacks, were preparing for another battle for the bridge when they suddenly heard trumpets blaring from their southern flank. A French force had somehow crossed the river below the bridge and was marching toward the Austrian flank at Arcola. The sound of trumpets was quickly replaced by shouts and the whizzing of bullets. The sudden appearance of the French on their flank was too much for the wearied Austrians. Not waiting to see the size of the French force, they panicked and fled the scene. The battle for Verona was lost, and with it the doom of Mantua was sealed. Somehow, Napoleon had managed to snatch victory from defeat. The Battle of Arcola helped forge the legend of his invincibility. Interpretation. Learn from the great master himself. Attacking from the front is rarely wise. The soldiers facing you will be tightly packed in, a concentration of force that will amplify their power to resist you. Go for their flank, their vulnerable side. This principle is applicable to conflicts or encounters of any scale. Individuals often show their flank, signal their vulnerability. By its opposite, the front they show most visibly to the world. This front can be an aggressive personality, a way of dealing with people by pushing them around. Or it can be some obvious defense mechanism, a focus on keeping out intruders to maintain stability in their lives. It can be their most cherished beliefs and ideas. It can be the way they make themselves liked. The more you get people to expose this front, to show more of themselves and the directions they tend to move in, the more their unprotected flanks will come into focus. Unconscious desires, gaping insecurities, precarious alliances, uncontrollable compulsions. Once you move on their flanks, your targets will turn to face you and lose their equilibrium. All enemies are vulnerable from their sides. There is no defense against a well-designed flanking maneuver. Keys to warfare. You must ask yourself this question. What is the point of being direct and frontal if it only increases people's resistance and makes them more certain of their own ideas? Directness and honesty may give you a feeling of relief, but they also stir up antagonism. As tactics, they are ineffective. In war itself, blood war, not the interpersonal wars of everyday life, frontal battles have become rare. Military officers have come to realize that direct attack increases resistance, when indirection lowers it. The people who win true power in the difficult modern world are those who have learned indirection. They know the value of approaching at an angle, disguising their intentions, lowering the enemy's resistance, hitting the soft, exposed flank instead of butting horns. Rather than try to push or pull people, they coax them to turn in the direction they desire. This takes effort, but pays dividends down the road in reduced conflict and greater results. The key to any flanking maneuver is to proceed in steps. Your initial move cannot reveal your intentions or true line of attack. First, hit them directly to hold their attention to the front. Let them come at you mano a mano. An attack from the side now will be unexpected and hard to combat. Think of people's ego and vanity as a kind of front. When they are attacking you and you don't know why, it is often because you have inadvertently threatened their ego, their sense of importance in the world. Whenever possible, you must work to make people feel secure about themselves. Again, use whatever works. Subtle flattery, a gift, an unexpected promotion, an offer of alliance, a presentation of you and they as equals, a mirroring of their ideas and values. All these things will make them feel anchored in their frontal position relative to the world, lowering their defenses and making them like you. Secure and comfortable, they are now set up for a flanking maneuver. The more subtle and indirect your maneuvers in life, the better. In 1801, Napoleon suddenly offered Russia the chance to become the protector of the island of Malta, then under French control. That would give the Russians an important base in the Mediterranean. The offer seemed generous, but Napoleon knew that the English would soon take control of the island, for they coveted it and had the forces in place to take it, and the French navy was too weak to hold it. The English and the Russians were allies, but their alliance could be endangered by a squabble over Malta. That discord was Napoleon's goal all along. The ultimate evolution of strategy is toward more and more indirection. An opponent who cannot see where you are heading is at a severe disadvantage. The more angles you use, like a cue ball in billiards caroming off several sides of the table, the harder it will be for your opponents to defend themselves. Whenever possible, calculate your moves to produce this caroming effect. It is the perfect disguise for your aggression. Reversal. In politics, occupying the flank by taking a similar position to the other's side, co-opting its ideas for your own purposes, is a powerful ploy, one that President Clinton used to great effect in his triangulations with the Republicans. This gives the opponent nothing to strike at, no room to maneuver. But staying too long on the opponent's flank can bring a price. The public, the real soft plank for any politician, loses its sense of what the triangulator stands for, what sets him and his party apart from the other side. Over time, this can prove dangerous. Polarity, creating the appearance of sharp differences, is more effective in the long run. Beware of occupying the opponent's flank at the expense of exposing your own. (19) Envelop the enemy. The annihilation strategy. People will use any kind of gap in your defenses to attack you or avenge themselves on you. So offer no gaps. The secret is to envelop your opponents, create relentless pressure on them from all sides, dominate their attention, and close off their access to the outside world. Make your attacks unpredictable to create a vaporous feeling of vulnerability. Finally, as you sense their weakening resolve, crush their willpower by tightening the noose. The best encirclements are psychological. You have surrounded their minds. The Horns of the Beast. In December 1878, the British declared war on the Zulus, the warrior tribe of present-day South Africa. The rather flimsy pretext was border troubles between Zululand and the British state of Natal. The real aim was to destroy the Zulu army, the last remaining native force threatening British interests in the area, and to absorb Zulu territories into a British-run confederation of states. The British commander, Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford, drafted a plan to invade Zululand with 3 columns. The central one aimed at the capital of Ulundi, the heart of the kingdom. Many Englishmen in Natal were thrilled at the prospect of war and at the potential benefits of taking over Zululand, but no one was as excited as 48-year-old Colonel Anthony William Durnford. In all his years of military service, Durnford had not once seen action. Eager to impress, Durnford volunteered to organize an elite force of native soldiers from Natal to fight alongside the British. His offer was accepted, but as the British invaded Zululand in early January 1879, he found himself cut out of the main action. Lord Chelmsford did not trust him, thinking his hunger for glory made him impetuous. Also, for someone with no battle experience, he was old. So Durnford and his company were stationed at Rorke's Drift in western Zululand to help monitor the border areas with Natal. Dutifully, but bitterly, Durnford followed his orders. On January 21st, Chelmsford took half of the central column, which was encamped at the foot of a mountain called Isandlwana, and led it east in search of the Zulus. Once he had found the enemy, he would bring the rest of his army forward, but the elusive Zulus might attack the camp while he was away, and the men at Rorke's Drift were the closest reserves. Needing to reinforce Isandlwana, he sent word to Durnford to bring his company there. As colonel, Durnford would now be the highest-ranking officer at the camp, but Chelmsford could not worry about Durnford's leadership qualities. The impending battle was the only thing on his mind. Early on the morning of January 22nd, Durnford received the news he had been waiting for all his life. Barely able to contain his excitement, he led his 400 men east to Isandlwana, arriving at the camp at around 10 a.m. Surveying the land, he understood why Chelmsford had put his main camp here. To the east and south were miles of rolling grassland. Zulus approaching from that direction would be seen well in advance. To the north was Isandlwana, and beyond it the plains of Enkutu. This side was a little less secure, but scouts had been placed at key points in the plains and at the mountain passes. Attack from that direction would almost certainly be detected in time. Shortly after his arrival, Durnford received a report that a seemingly large Zulu force had been spotted on the plains of Enkutu, heading east, perhaps to attack Chelmsford's half of the central column from the rear. Chelmsford had left explicit orders to keep the 1,800 men at Isandlwana together. In case of attack, they had enough firepower to defeat the entire Zulu army, as long as they stayed concentrated and kept their lines in order. But to Durnford, it was more important to find the main Zulu force. The British soldiers were beginning to grow edgy, not knowing where this vaporous enemy was. The Zulus had no cavalry, and many of them fought with spears. Once their hiding place was uncovered, the rest would be easy. The superior weaponry and discipline of the British soldiers would prevail. Durnford thought Chelmsford was too cautious. As senior officer at the camp, he decided to disobey orders and lead his 400 men northeast, parallel to the plains of Enkutu, to find out what the Zulus were up to. As Durnford marched out of the camp, a scout on the plains of Enkutu saw a few Zulus herding cattle some 4 miles away. He gave chase on his horse, but the Zulus disappeared into thin air. Riding to the point where they had vanished, he stopped his horse just in time. Below him lay a wide, deep ravine, completely hidden from the surface of the plains, and crowded into the ravine, as far as he could see in both directions, were Zulu warriors in full war regalia, an eerie intensity in their eyes. They seemed to have been meditating on the imminent battle. For a second, the horseman was too stunned to move, but as hundreds of spears were suddenly aimed at him, he turned and galloped away. The Zulus quickly rose and began clambering out of the ravine. Soon, the other scouts on the plain saw the same terrifying sight, a wide line of Zulus filling the horizon, some 20,000 men strong. Even from a distance, it was clear that they were moving in formation, each end of their line coming forward in a shape resembling horns. The scouts quickly brought word to the camp that the Zulus were coming. By the time Durnford received the news, he could look up to the ridge above him and see a line of Zulus streaming down the slope. He quickly formed his own men into lines to fight them off while retreating to the camp. The Zulus maneuvered with incredible precision. What Durnford could not see was that the men in the left tip of the horn were moving through the tall grass toward the rear of the camp to link up with the other end of the horn and complete the encirclement. The Zulus facing Durnford and his men seemed to grow out of the earth, emerging from behind boulders or from out of the grass in ever greater numbers. Whenever the British stopped to reload, the Zulus would advance ever closer, occasionally one reaching Durnford's lines and disemboweling a British soldier with the powerful Zulu spear, which made an unbearable sucking sound as it went in and out. Durnford managed to get his men back into camp. The British were surrounded, but they closed ranks and fired away, killing scores of Zulus and keeping them at bay. Durnford looked around. The fight had turned into a stalemate, and his soldiers were responding with relative confidence. Most imperceptibly, though, Durnford noticed a slight slackening in their fire. Soldiers were running out of ammunition, and in the time it took them to open a new crate and reload, the Zulus would tighten the circle and a wave of fear would ripple through the men as here and there a soldier in the front lines would be impaled. The Zulus fought with an intensity the British had never seen. Rushing forward as if bullets could not harm them, they seemed to be in a trance. Suddenly, sensing the turning point in the battle, the Zulus began to rattle their spears against their shields and emit their war cry, "Usuthu!" It was a terrifying din. At the northern end of the camp, a group of British soldiers gave way, just a few, panicking at the sight and sound of the Zulus, now only a few yards distant. But the Zulus poured through the gap, as if on cue. Those in the circle between the two horns rained spears on the British, killing many and making havoc of their lines. From out of nowhere, a reserve force rushed forward, fanning around the circle and doubling its squeezing power. Durnford tried to maintain order, but it was too late. In a matter of seconds, panic. Now it was every man for himself. Durnford ran to the one gap in the encirclement and tried to keep it open so that his remaining men could retreat to Rorke's Drift. Minutes later, he was impaled by a Zulu spear. Soon the battle at Isandlwana was over. A few hundred managed to escape through the gap that Durnford had died in securing. The rest, over 1,400 men, were killed. After such a devastating defeat, the British forces quickly retreated out of Zululand. For the time being, the war was indeed over, but not as the British had expected. Interpretation. A few months after the defeat of Isandlwana, the British mounted a larger invasion and finally defeated the Zulus. But the lesson of Isandlwana remains instructive, particularly considering the incredible discrepancy in technology. The Zulu way of fighting had been perfected earlier in the 19th century by King Shaka Zulu, who, by the 1820s, had transformed what had been a relatively minor tribe into the region's greatest fighting force. The Zulus could not fight for extended periods, since their culture required lengthy cleansing rituals after the shedding of blood in battle. During these rituals, they were completely vulnerable to attack. No Zulu could fight again or even rejoin the tribe until he had been cleansed. The immense Zulu army was also costly to maintain in the field. Once mobilized, then, the army not only had to defeat its enemies in battle, it had to annihilate every last one of them, eliminating the possibility of a counterattack during the vulnerable cleansing period, and allowing a speedy demobilization. Encirclement was the Zulu method of obtaining this complete kind of victory.